My stepdad sold my cabin while I was saving lives abroad to pay his gambling debts. He forged documents and almost got away with it. But my lawyer best friend destroyed him legally. I'm 29 years old. I work as a volunteer in international health programs, and the story I'm about to tell still makes my blood boil every time I think about it. But it also makes me feel proud that I stood my ground. Basically, my stepfather Christopher tried to steal my mountain cabin while I was on the other side of the world saving lives, and what happened after that was a legal battle I never imagined. I'd have to fight against my own family. I guess I should start from the beginning so everything makes sense. I bought the cabin like 6 years ago with my best friend Olivia, who's a corporate lawyer and probably the most organized person I know. We'd always dreamed of having a place in the mountains, that kind of refuge where you can disconnect from everything and just breathe clean air and see the stars without light pollution. We saved for years, literally years, cutting expenses and living with the bare minimum until we finally scraped together enough for the down payment on a small but perfect property in the mountains, like 3 hours from the city. It was a 2-bedroom log cabin with a huge fireplace and a deck that looked directly out onto an incredible valley, and we both loved it like it was our baby. When we bought it, Olivia insisted that everything be perfectly documented because, well, she's a lawyer and those things matter to her. We made a super specific co-ownership agreement that clearly stated that any decision about the property required both signatures and that neither of us could sell, rent, or make major changes without the other's written consent. At the time, I thought it was a bit excessive. Like, we've been best friends since high school. Why all the formalities? But Olivia told me, trust me, Hannah, this is going to protect both of us, and it turns out she was absolutely right. My stepfather Christopher came into my life when I was like 14, after my mom was widowed. My biological father died when I was 12 inches a car accident, and my mom met Christopher like 2 years later at work. I think. At first, he seemed like a decent guy. He worked in sales or something, always had stories about his clients and his commissions, but over time, I started noticing weird things. Like he always had money problems despite supposedly making good money, or my mom would suddenly have to cover expenses that he should have paid. He was never abusive or anything like that, but there was something about him that just didn't generate trust, He was like too interested in my stuff, in what I earned when I started working, in my financial plans. Once, when I had just bought the cabin with Olivia, he asked me if I didn't want him to help me manage it better. And I told him no thanks, that I already had everything under control with Olivia. He got kind of weird that day, like offended, but I didn't give it much importance at the time. Last year, I decided to take a 6-month assignment at a rural clinic in Central America, basically helping with vaccination programs and basic care in communities that don't have regular access to medical services. It was something I'd wanted to do since college, and finally all the pieces aligned so I could go. Cell phone signal there was terrible. Like, I had to walk about 20 minutes to the nearest town to be able to connect to the internet decently. And most of the time, I was so busy with work that the days flew by without me even being able to check my messages. Olivia knew I was going to be basically incommunicado, and before I left, I gave her power of attorney over certain emergency things. But I never thought she'd need it for anything related to the cabin. I was in my 4th month there. It was a Tuesday afternoon and I had managed to get signal on my phone, when suddenly like 15 WhatsApp messages start coming in all at the same time. Most were from my mom and Christopher, and there was one from Olivia that said in caps, "Call me urgent." My heart immediately started racing because I thought something bad had happened to someone, like an accident or an illness, so I called my mom first. She answered after the second ring, and the first thing she said was, "Hannah, honey, Christopher has something to tell you." And I thought, what the hell is going on? Christopher took the phone, and in a super casual voice, like he was commenting on the weather, he tells me, "Hannah, I sold the cabin. I got a good price, and I needed the money to resolve some matters. I'll transfer you your part as soon as everything closes." I literally froze with the phone to my ear, processing what I'd just heard, and all I could say was, "What did you say?" And he repeated, "I sold the cabin. It's all arranged. Don't worry. I'm not going to lie to you." At that moment, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach with all their strength. The anger that rose through my body was instant. My hands started shaking, and I yelled into the phone, "What do you mean you sold? The cabin? You can't sell anything. The cabin isn't yours." He was quiet for a second and then said something like, "Well, I'm your father, and I made the decision that was best for the family. It's done, Hannah. I literally couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told him he wasn't my father, that he had no right to my property, and that he'd better be joking because this was illegal. He started getting defensive, saying I was overreacting, that he was just helping to solve serious financial problems. And my mom in the background was saying things like, Hannah, calm down. What does it matter now? What's done is done. I hung up the phone because I felt like if I kept talking, I was going to explode. And I immediately called Olivia. Olivia answered almost immediately, and before I could say anything, she was already saying, I already know what happened. Christopher called me this morning to tell me he'd sold the cabin and that he was going to handle all the paperwork. I told him he couldn't do that without our signatures, and he hung up. Hannah, this is fraud. He can't sell a property that isn't his. Hearing Olivia say that with such certainty calmed me down a bit, because it meant I wasn't crazy, that this was as outrageous as I thought. She explained that according to our co-ownership agreement, any sale required both our notarized signatures and that Christopher had absolutely no legal authority to sell anything. I asked her what I should do, and she said, finish your work there as quickly as you can and come back. I'm going to start investigating what exactly he did, and we're going to stop this however we can. The next 2 months were an absolute nightmare. I was in the middle of the jungle, basically, unable to do much more than send occasional messages to Olivia to follow the progress of the disaster. Olivia discovered that Christopher had contacted a real estate agent, had forged documents pretending to be my legal representative or something, and had put the cabin on the market for a price that was like 30% less than what it was actually worth. The real estate agent, who apparently didn't do his due diligence, found a buyer pretty quickly, and Christopher was pushing to close the deal as soon as possible. When Olivia asked him why he needed the money so urgently, my mom finally admitted that Christopher had very serious gambling debts, like debts with people who were pressuring and threatening him, and that he'd thought selling the cabin was the only way to get out of that problem. I couldn't concentrate on my work, honestly. Every time I tried to sleep, I'd wake up thinking about Christopher at my cabin, probably showing it to potential buyers as if it were his. Selling something Olivia and I had worked so hard for. The helplessness of being so far away and not being able to do anything directly was horrible, and there were days when I literally cried from frustration. My colleagues at the clinic noticed something was wrong, but I didn't want to worry them with my personal problems. So I just told them I had a complicated family situation and was handling it from a distance. Finally, 2 weeks before my contract ended, I decided I couldn't be there anymore with all this happening. I talked to the program director and explained the situation, that I had a family legal emergency and needed to return immediately. He was very understanding and let me finish early, even though that meant I lost part of my compensation. But honestly, I didn't care about the money at that point. All I wanted was to get home and confront Christopher face to face. The trip back was eternal, like 20 hours of planes and layovers, and the whole time I rehearsed in my head what I was going to say to him, what I was probably going to scream at him. I arrived on a Friday night, left my suitcases at my apartment, and sent Christopher a message saying we needed to talk urgently, that I was going to go to the house Saturday morning. He responded something like, okay, we can talk civilly. And I thought, civilly, my ass. This guy tried to steal my property. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I basically stayed awake staring at the ceiling and feeling the rage boiling in my chest. By 8 inches the morning, I was already driving to my mom's house, which is like 40 minutes from where I live. When I arrived, my mom opened the door with a worried face that almost made me feel bad for her. Almost. She let me in, and Christopher was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee, as if this were a casual business meeting. He didn't even greet me. He just said, Hannah, I understand you're upset, but you need to see the full picture. I sat across from him and told him, the full picture is that you tried to illegally sell my property to pay your gambling debts. That's what I see, Christopher. He made a face like frustration and started explaining that he was in a very difficult situation, that there were dangerous people after him, that he thought I would understand and support him because we were family. I told him that didn't give him the right to commit fraud, that the cabin wasn't just mine but also Olivia's, and that what he did was literally a crime. He started getting defensive, saying I was overreacting, that he was going to pay me my part, that he didn't see what the problem was if in the end I was going to receive money. My mom intervened at that moment, saying that Christopher had made a mistake but that we should resolve it as a family, without involving the police or lawyers. That would only make things worse for everyone. I looked at her and said, Mom, He forged documents and is trying to steal my property. This isn't something that gets resolved with a family conversation. This is illegal. Christopher then changed tactics and started getting emotional, saying he was just trying to survive, that he'd made mistakes with gambling but was trying to fix it. Please don't report him because that would destroy him. I stood up and told him he should have thought about that before signing false documents, and that I wasn't going to let him get away with it just because now he was scared of the consequences. I left the house and called Olivia immediately. She told me she'd already been investigating and had contacted the real estate agent to confirm the details of the sale. The agent, when he realized what was happening, got super nervous because obviously he didn't want to be involved in something illegal. Olivia had explained the situation to him, and he had admitted that Christopher was the one who contacted him. Showed him some documents that seemed legitimate, but were obviously false or altered. And he alone signed all the papers on the seller's side. And the agent said Christopher had told him I was out of the country, and that he had legal power to handle my affairs, which was a complete lie. Olivia told me the agent was willing to cooperate with any investigation and that he was basically terrified of losing his license for not having done due diligence. That same afternoon, Olivia and I met with a lawyer specialized in real estate fraud. We explained the whole situation, showed him our original co-ownership agreement, the documents Christopher had used for the sale, and the entire communication history. The lawyer reviewed everything and confirmed what we already knew. This was definite fraud, and Christopher could face criminal charges. He recommended that we first send a cease and desist letter to Christopher and the buyer explaining that the sale was invalid and that any attempt to proceed would be considered participation in criminal activity. He also suggested we contact the police to make a formal report, especially because document forgery was involved. Olivia drafted the letter that same night. It was like 3 pages explaining in detail why the sale was completely illegal and threatening legal action if it wasn't stopped immediately. We sent it by certified mail to Christopher, the buyer, and the real estate agent. Christopher's reaction was to call my mom crying, literally crying according to her, saying I was destroying him. How could I do this to the family? My mom called me super angry, saying I was overreacting, that Christopher was desperate, and I was being cruel. I told her that what was cruel was trying to steal my property, and that if she couldn't see that, then I had nothing more to talk to her about either. I hung up the phone, and honestly, I felt bad because she's my mom and I love her, but I was also furious that she was defending something so obviously wrong. The next day, we went to the local police station and filed a formal complaint. We were attended by a detective named Parker, a guy like 50 years old who looked like he'd seen everything in his career. We explained the situation and he took notes on everything, asked for copies of the documents, and told us he was going to open an investigation. He was super professional and told us that cases like this were unfortunately more common than we thought, especially when there were family relationships involved and people thought they could get away with it. He asked us if we wanted to proceed with criminal charges if the investigation confirmed fraud. And both Olivia and I said yes without hesitation. Detective Parker told us he was going to contact the real estate agent, the buyer, and obviously Christopher, to interrogate them, and that he'd keep us informed of the progress. The next 2 weeks were intense. Detective Parker worked fast, and it turned out the buyer was a young couple who had no idea they were involved in something illegal. When the situation was explained to them, they immediately withdrew their offer and canceled the transaction. The real estate agent cooperated fully with the investigation and admitted he hadn't properly verified Christopher's documentation, basically admitting he'd made a serious professional mistake. Christopher, for his part, tried to argue that he thought he had the right to sell the cabin because I was his stepdaughter and he was part of the family, which obviously made no legal sense. Detective Parker explained to him that wasn't a valid defense and that he'd committed multiple crimes: document forgery, fraud, and attempted theft. The most satisfying part was when the transaction was officially voided. The buyer got their deposit back. The real estate agent faced an investigation by his regulatory board, though he didn't lose his license in the end, and Christopher was left without the money he so desperately needed. His creditors, whoever they were, kept pressuring him, and my mom called me like 3 times asking me to reconsider, that maybe I could give Christopher a loan or something. I told her absolutely not, that he had tried to rob me and that the consequences of his actions were only his problem. She got very angry and told me I was a terrible daughter. How could I be so cold with family? And I responded that family doesn't do what Christopher did, and if she couldn't see that, then we had serious problems in our relationship. A month after the investigation started, Christopher was formally charged with fraudulent misrepresentation and attempted theft. He had to hire a lawyer, went to court, and eventually accepted a plea deal where he pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He ended up with probation, community service, and a restraining order that prohibited him from contacting me or approaching the property. He also had to pay all the legal costs that Olivia and I had incurred, which was like $5,000 altogether. My mom, surprisingly, after all the drama, eventually admitted that Christopher had done something terrible. She didn't exactly apologize, but she told me she understood why I'd taken the actions I took, and that although it hurt her to see Christopher in that situation, she knew he'd brought it on himself. Olivia and I finally recovered complete control of the cabin. We decided to put in security cameras and a better alarm system, basically to make sure no one could try something similar in the future. We also updated all our legal documents and made sure any public record clearly showed we were the only owners and that any transaction required both our notarized signatures in person. Detective Parker recommended we do all that and told us we'd handled the situation exactly as we should have, that many people in similar situations let themselves be manipulated by family and end up losing their properties. The relationship with my mom has been complicated since then. We talk occasionally, but there's a tension that didn't exist before. Like, she knows I took the right path, but she's still married to Christopher, and that makes things weird. She invited me to dinner like 2 months ago, and it was awkward because neither of us mentioned Christopher all night. It was like the invisible elephant in the room. I suppose with time things might get better, or maybe not. I don't know anymore. What I do know is that I don't regret for 1 second defending my property and setting clear boundaries. There were moments where I felt guilty, especially when my mom called me crying, but Olivia always reminded me that I hadn't done anything wrong, that Christopher was the criminal, not me. Like 3 weeks ago, Olivia and I were finally able to go to the cabin together for the first time since all the drama. We'd been so busy with the legal stuff that we hadn't had time to just enjoy the place. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, lit the fireplace, opened a bottle of wine, and sat on the deck watching the sunset. Olivia raised her glass and said, "Let's toast to defending what's ours and not letting ourselves be trampled." And I toasted with her, feeling prouder of myself than I had in a long time. We started planning some small renovations, like changing the kitchen floors and maybe adding another bathroom, just to make the cabin even more ours and erase any negative energy this whole situation might have left. The truth is that this whole mess taught me a lot about boundaries and about not letting family manipulation make you doubt yourself. Christopher played the "we're family" card until the end, and my mom tried it too. But at the end of the day, family doesn't have the right to rob you or abuse your trust. I had moments where I thought, am I being too harsh? Should I just let this go for family peace? But every time I had those doubts, I remembered that what he did was illegal, and that if I let it go, I'd be sending the message that it's okay to take advantage of me. I couldn't live with that. Now when I go to the cabin and sit on that deck looking at the mountains, I feel a peace I didn't have before. It's like the whole process of defending the property made it even more special, more valuable. It's no longer just a pretty place in the mountains. It's the place I fought to keep, the place where I set boundaries and stood firm despite all the family pressure. Olivia says we should write our names on some beam or something, like officially marking our territory. And honestly, I think we're going to do it. This place is ours, completely ours, and no one is ever going to take it away from us again.